from Missouri, Republican Senator Eric Schmitt. His new book is Last Line of Defense, How to Beat the Left in Court. Senator, I want to get to the microchips because I'm sure that you, as a former attorney general, a lawyer, a conservative, have a lot to say. But I want to start with some other news. The president says he wants to send the military, maybe even active duty troops, and not just the National Guard, to fight crime in Chicago and New York. So I have a couple questions around that for you. Why those cities, when places like Memphis and even your own St. Louis have worse violent crime problems?
Well, actually, I'm glad you asked that because we were able to announce earlier this week an arrangement with the FBI to have the largest per capita investment of permanent FBI agents in St. Louis with intel officers to take on violent crime. And so I think Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, and my conversations with them during the confirmation process made it very clear they wanted to get FBI agents out of Washington, D.C. and into the field. So I think that is happening. I think St. Louis can be a model for that. When I was Attorney General, we partnered with federal prosecutors to take on violent crime when you had a Soros prosecutor who wouldn't do her job. So I think that's actually happening. As it relates to the National Guard, though, the National Guard's been deployed to make sure ICE agents are protected for their deportations. And of course, Washington, D.C. is kind of a different example because it's a federal enclave. But I think the results speak for themselves, Chris. I mean, you didn't have a murder in a week. I know that shouldn't be such a big deal. It is. Carjackings are down 85%. Robberies are down nearly 50%. Violent crime altogether is down 25%. So it's been significant. I just finally say this as a former prosecutor myself. There's just no substitute for having law enforcement visible and on the streets in prosecutions, not just getting the bad guys off the streets, but the deterrent effect it has as well.
So, but you make the point about that Washington is a federal district under the control of the federal government. If a Democrat tried to do this on another issue, right, in another city, like enforcing environmental rules or protecting transgender rights or whatever, right, if Joe Biden had nationalized the National Guard in red states to enforce laws that they thought were being inadequately enforced, I assume that Republican attorneys general would be sounding the alarm. What are the constitutional limiting principles in your mind around when the president can nationalize the National Guard?
Well, you saw it clearly in times of national emergency or, say, a wildfire situation in California. But you also saw, which was held up in the courts, by the way, when federal agents like ICE or the FBI are trying to do their jobs and they're being attacked by violent mobs. That's exactly what was happening in Los Angeles. President Trump was well within his rights to have the National Guard deployed. National Guard can help out support what's happening with law enforcement. I think that's what President Trump has talked about, is making sure local law enforcement can do their job, and then you have sort of the support that the National Guard can, and protection that the National Guard can provide.
What about the regular military? What are the circumstances legally, constitutionally, when the president could direct regular military forces into America's cities?
Well, I think you saw one example of that again in Los Angeles, where the Marines were out there to make sure the ICE agents who were under attack by violent left-wing mobs could do their jobs. The military is not conducting law enforcement activities themselves, but simply support and protection.
Okay. Your colleague, fellow Republican Rand Paul, had this to say about that Intel deal. If socialism is government owning the means of production, wouldn't the government owning part of Intel be a step towards socialism? Terrible idea. Do you agree with your fellow senator?
Well, I think this is a pretty specific example, and I listened to your lead, and what everything has in common had to do with national security. I think as it relates to Intel, it's a 10% stake, a non-governance position, by the way, in exchange for the billions that they're getting from taxpayers. But I think the most important point to make here for this, I think it'll be pretty temporary move, is you can't have the only chip maker in the United States go down, which is what the concern is. So 90% of our chips that you put in everything from iPhones to F-15s, which are built in St. Louis, by the way, are 90% of them come from Taiwan. And so onshoring, reshoring these critical minerals, these critical technologies for our national security is really important. I think that's what was driving the decision.
Okay, let's talk about your book. Let me read you to you. You list a number of Biden-era emergency declarations: COVID-19, student debt, climate change, transgender rights, and you write, these labels gave them cover to bend or arguably break the law with sloppy executive orders that were extremely vulnerable to legal challenge. Currently, Senator, there are 51 states of emergency on the book, 9 of them declared since President Trump took office the second time in January, including his emergencies around the border, energy, and trade. Don't the same concerns apply now for the Trump emergencies that applied for the Biden emergencies?
Well, the courts have upheld that President Trump can declare an invasion effectively under the Alien Enemies Right. That act, that's what's being litigated right now. But I would draw a distinction here. What we saw in the first 4 years, or in Joe Biden's 4 years, was an environment where censorship, I mean, big tech companies were colluding with the federal government. That was the nature of our Missouri versus Biden, where we uncovered, and I'm sure as a journalist you would appreciate this, the First Amendment's very important. The government shouldn't be dictating what social media companies have up and what people can say and what they can't say. And so in the book, Last Line of Defense, I hope people check out on Amazon today, we take the deposition of Fauci. We take the deposition of Elvis Chan, who was the FBI agent who was pre-bunking the Hunter Biden laptop story in 2020, even though the FBI had the laptop in 2019. So regardless of your political stripe, the amount of censorship that was happening with the Biden administration was chilling and downright scary. And you take the student loan debt forgiveness case, he had no authority to do it. We took that to the Supreme Court and we won too. So the fact of the matter is a lot of these battles are being played out in the courtroom, and the point of the book is that conservatives need to stand up and push back, because the left at this point is simply about power and control, and they've weaponized the DOJ, as you saw during Joe Biden's term, against citizens, against Catholics. And so we stood up, we fought back, and we won. So this book is really a playbook of how you go do that.
But wouldn't the people on the left today say that that's exactly what the Trump Justice Department is doing? That's what you just said is exactly what I hear Democratic attorneys general and Democratic governors say about the Trump Justice Department.
Well, they might say it, but the courts haven't held that up. The courts have held that he can fire people at USAID, he can handle programming of personnel, and he can handle core Article 2 powers like, enforcing our immigration laws, which is why the deportations have been held up. The John Bolton example this week, that was being investigated, by the way, by and large, by the Biden DOJ. So I don't think that has anything to do with going after political enemies. It's about accountability at this point on a documents case, is my guess.
Okay, last thing. So the trade emergency, right? The president is invoking emergency authority to intervene on trade, to do all of this trade stuff. If it's an emergency that is addressing trade deficits over the past 50 years, can something be an emergency for 50 years that wasn't an emergency before? Does it seem arbitrary? And I guess maybe to put a finer point on it, isn't this really Congress's job, not the president's job?
Well, look, you're not going to get an argument from me that Congress has abdicated a lot of its responsibilities over the years. I think you look at the administrative state writ large, the idea that a lot of congressmen stand up and say, I voted for the greatest bill in the world, but I can't believe what the EPA did. I think the Chevron, or the overturning Chevron last year, is a big step. Congress should take more of an active role. But I think President Trump is moving forward on core Article 2 powers as the commander-in-chief that the courts have upheld.
Okay, America, if you still called Panera Bread the St. Louis Bread Company, you would know him already. But if you don't, there he is, Senator Eric Schmitt. We thank you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.